The Key to the Indian by Reid. Chapter 12. An Iroquois Doll. Omri scarcely had time to draw one dust-choked breath in the darkness under the platform before he felt a sensation of swift, sudden transference, not bodily movement, a kind of spinning, whisking feeling, not even of being spun or whisked through air, but through some other dimension. At the same time, in that same split second, he was conscious of an overwhelming release of tension. He was going home. He knew it. It was like no earthly feeling of relief. It was better. He was going back where he belonged, to his own time and his own body. He lifted his head, opened his eyes, and saw a rooster. He was looking through the windscreen of the car at the dark back of the parking bay. The rooster had perched on a pile of logs. It was all quite familiar, but he was disoriented for a moment. Then he heard a voice, his mother's voice, almost screaming. "Lionel! Lionel, wake up! What's wrong? Oh, do wake up, please!" He felt something bulky stirring on his right side. He turned. His father was there, behind the steering wheel, lifting his head, which had been bowed on his chest. His hands moved, flexed, and for a second his father looked at them as if surprised to see them. He looked up at his face in the driving mirror. An expression of incredulous relief came over it. Then he turned to the window on his side. Omri saw his mother standing there, bent over. Her hand was through the open window. She was holding the car key. With a sudden jerk, Omri looked over his shoulder. Guion was there in the back seat, leaning against the aged knapsack. He wasn't waking up. His hair had blood on it. Blood that made a small runnel down his forehead. Blood had made a small runnel down his forehead, across his closed eye, and on down his cheek. What happened right after that was all confusion for Omri. He felt so tired he could hardly move or think, but around him everything was moving, and his parents' voices were echoing and booming through Omri's head as if they were all underwater. His father stumbled out of the car, clutched his head in both hands, and fell back against the door for a moment before straightening up. His mother was opening the back door, and the next minute Guion was gone, in an upheaval of movement and exclamations. His mother must have handed him to his father, because the next thing Omri knew, his mother had come round to his side of the car, opened the door, and was half helping, half lifting him out. She was almost gibbering. Darling, are you all right? What happened? I came out to feed the chickens thinking you were miles on your way to Dartmoor and found the car still here, the engine running, all of you unconscious. Oh, Omri, my darling, I thought... She clutched him tightly in her arms and muttered into his hair, "I thought you were all dead." It was just as well she was holding him. His legs were giving way under him. She had to help him back across the yard and the lane, up the path and into the house. There was then a timeless muddled patch where Omri half lay in an armchair in the living room, trying to get his head back together, while a doctor was called for Guion. By the time he arrived, Guion had come to. He was lying on a sofa with rugs over him, and his mother washing the blood out of his hair. Omri, as if from far away, heard him moaning, and heard his mother urging him not to move, not to try to talk. The doctor examined him and said he seemed all right, but he'd have to have a head x-ray, and could someone drive him to the hospital? "I will," said their mother immediately. The doctor picked Guion up in his arms, still wrapped in a rug, and went out of the house. Omri's mother, following, stopped beside Omri's chair. "Omri, will you be okay? Dad's upstairs. I have to drive Gilly to the hospital." Omri sat up sharply. "In the car? You're going to drive him in our car?" "Yes." "Can't the doctor take him?" "Why?" Her eyes focused on him. "Omri, is there something wrong with the car?" No, only..." "What?" "Have you got the car key?" "Yes." He checked her arm. "Please, Mum, use the spare." His mother gave him a funny look, but she went to the little box of hooks by the front door, hung one key up, and took the spare key. "You rest. I'll be back soon." As soon as the door closed behind her, Omri leapt out of the chair, fell back into it again, and rose more slowly. Carefully he climbed the stairs and crept into his parents' bedroom. His father was lying on the bed with his shoes on, apparently asleep. Omri put a hand on his shoulder and shook him gently, then harder. Dad, wake up!" Omri felt scared to death suddenly, But his father stirred, shook his head, sat up, and put his head down between his bent legs. "Are you okay, Dad?" "I don't know," he said in a hollow voice. "I suppose so. I feel weird. Utterly weird." Omri sat down on the bed. He waited a moment with his heart pounding, and then he found the courage to ask, "Where did you go?" His father raised his head sharply. Omri could see a change in him. He looked suddenly older. "I went back," he said. The key worked, after all." "Don't I know it, but where?" "The belt. I had the wampum belt in my pocket." "You mean you went back to Little Bear's time?" His father nodded. Omri gazed at him, excitement replacing the fear. Suddenly he reached over and shook his father by both shoulders. "Well, don't just sit there, Dad. Tell me." "Tell me about you first, and Kion. Kion went somewhere too, and he got hurt." "Yes, that girl, she was holding him upside down. She must have dropped him. Don't worry, though. Jotham was so tiny, and Gilly didn't have far to fall." "Omri, what are you talking about?" "Dad, I'll tell you later. Tell me about you." His father drew a deep breath. "I don't know if I can describe it." "Describe what was around you." "I can't." "Just anything. What could you see?" "Nothing. I couldn't see anything." "What do you mean? Were you blind?" "Yes, blind, and I couldn't speak either. I couldn't breathe." "What?" He shook his head. His face was white. He swallowed. I kept trying to draw breath in, through my nose, through my mouth. I couldn't." "How could you stay alive if you couldn't breathe?" "Omri, I don't know, but some air must have been reaching my lungs somehow. Maybe through my skin, though I wasn't breathing. I can't tell you how terrible it was, till I realized I wasn't suffocating. Then I sort of accepted it, and the panic died down a bit, at least until—" "Could you hear?" "Yes, I could hear. I heard all sorts of sounds, voices, loud. They seemed to boom, but no clear words." "They were talking Iroquois, of course." "And there were lots of other noises, of fire crackling and insects whirring, buzzing, whining, and dogs." Omri thought he would burst with impatience. "Yes, Dad, yes! But just tell me what happened." His dad drew a deep, shaky breath. "I'll try. I was lying down after the first horror of not being able to see or speak, or of feeling I couldn't breathe. I tried to move, and I found every other part of me worked. I got up. Of course, the first thing I did was put my hands to my face. I got the most ghastly shock. The worst shock of my life." "What, Dad, what?" His father swallowed again and turned stark eyes on him. "I didn't have a face." Omri sat in silent horror. "Nothing, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, a smooth face of skin and bone with no features." For Omri, a memory flashed. Stuck on the outside of a teepee, two-dimensional, helpless, dumb, a totem animal of some kind, but able to see and hear, though not move. "But this was almost 1,000 times worse. Go on, what happened?" "I just stood there. What could I do? I was in a nightmare. Then I felt something pick me up." "Was it Little Bear?" "Yes. Not that I knew it then. I was so afraid, but he held me quite gently, and I got some notion of how small I was. There was a pause. I suppose he was looking at me. I put my hands up and pulled them down my face. I heard him give a sort of gasp, an exclamation, like a curse. Then I felt him carry me along. I felt the air of outdoors and heard a whole new lot of sounds. He stopped, and I felt him sort of shaking me. And I heard him talking in that strange language. He sounded very upset and angry. Then I heard a woman's voice. She shouted, I don't know. Not exactly apologetic, but patiently defending herself. Then he walked with me again and began to talk English to me. What did he say? He asked if I could hear him. I nodded. Then he said he was sorry. Bright Stars had made dolls for us to come into, but they were Iroquois dolls, he said. Iroquois